social media to have this same kind of unifying force?
Well, yeah, and I said yes without thinking then, because I think at the time, if somebody had said to me, hey, look, we've got this great idea, it's called Facebook, and people send each other pictures of themselves and sort of, you know, twit on about nothing to each other, and I would have gone, are you insane? I'm not investing in that. What a complete waste of everybody's time. So it just shows how foolish I may have been at the time. That's not to say that probably a huge amount of the time that people spend on Facebook is actually not socially constructive at all. It's just, it's sort of replacing gossiping over the garden hedge. But nevertheless, it has provided this extraordinary instrument that we are seeing taking hold. You talk about music. I just filmed a tiny clip 2 days ago for these kids called Blurred Vision from Canada, an Iranian group, or two of them are Iranian, I think, who had recorded my song Brick in the Wall Part 2. And they're relaunching it in conjunction with Amnesty International as a YouTube thing. So I did a, you know, hey Ayatollah, leave those kids alone, and they're trying to get as many people as they can from all over the world to point their video cameras at themselves and say, hey Ayatollah, leave those kids alone, in order to protest the repressive nature of Ahmadinejad's regime. So that's extraordinary.
You actually have, you know, I mean, more than 30 years on, you revived your iconic piece, The Wall. And I wonder what you see as its relevance to what's happening today.
Well, I hope you'll come to the show at some point. We're just about to go to Europe and do another 67 shows. So if you're in Europe, please come. The way the show is different than it was in 1979 is in 1979, when I did it with Pink Floyd, it was largely about Pink's personal story, and Pink's sort of 70% me and a little bit of Syd Barrett and a bit of a few other people from rock and roll. And I realized recently, before I resurrected it and put the new production together, that microcosmic story of that disaffected young man and his problems with whatever, political, sexual, emotional, whatever, could be seen in a larger way as an allegory for describing the way that governments and ideologies and religions react to and against one another, causing the enormous problems that we see for the people who live within those separated communities, separated as they are by walls of commerce and ideology and religion and so forth. And that is what my new production of The Wall is about.
And you said at the time when you wrote it, you were, quote, a frightened young man as well about it. Now, of course, 2 decades ago, the Berlin Wall came down, and it was, I mean, there was a huge symbolism with that as well, the fall of the Iron Curtain and the sort of East-West divide. Yet today we're seeing new walls being built. We're seeing what's happened with the West Bank wall, the Israel security barrier, segregation wall, depending on how people see it, and of course the Mexican border in the US. And I wonder, when you see, on one hand, an effort to bring down walls, and yet new walls going up, how you relate to that?
Well, as I keep, you know, restating throughout the show, fear builds walls, which is something actually that a photograph that my old lady took of the wall in Jerusalem, which had that quote on it, true as it is. And when we get frightened, that's what we tend to do. And when I say we, sometimes the fear can be real. And historically, of course, many cities were built with a wall around them. I read either on AlJazeera or BBC, one of those being the 2 places I get my news from on the internet, that they're toying with the idea now of building a wall that encircles Baghdad. So Baghdad now is to become a walled city, as it probably was, you know, 500–600 years ago. And there's lots of complaints about the fact that the whole of the city of Baghdad is now, it looks like a maze. It looks like a sort of 19th century, you know, English maze in a garden somewhere, because it's completely divided by blast walls everywhere. And they're creating ghettos. So now the Sunni minority are surrounded by walls, and they have to go through passes to get in and out. And so So that is extremely discouraging. But what you were talking about earlier, which is that we get at least to express the idea that this is not necessarily a good thing to one another, may in the long run help us to stop building walls at the rate that we are, and to tear as many of them down as we can.
Now, it's interesting, yeah, because you're referring to almost like these military walls. There's sort of green zones and things that are built as well when you get something like Baghdad, and this idea is kind of an interesting one. But I wonder, in summer of 2009, back in June that year, you visited the Aida Palestinian refugee camp. You went to Jenin as well, and that's very much affected by the large imposing wall there. What made you want to go and see that?
Well, I had been asked to do, I was doing a European tour and to go and do a gig in Tel Aviv. And I had accepted that. I signed a contract with the promoter there. And I was approached by Palestinians, a specific guy, Omar Bagoti is his name, and just sent me a very polite, nice email saying, listen, we have this thing called BDS, which we're trying to promote, and we think that a cultural boycott of Israel would be a good idea, and we're asking you, and this was signed by thousands and thousands and thousands of people from everywhere, from Morocco to Algeria, to lots and lots of signatures from artists all over the Middle East, suggesting that I shouldn't do that. So I decided that I ought to go and have a look at it and think about it. So I went. And I was met by a nice American lady in Jerusalem called Allegro Pachero, who works for the UN there. And they took me to Aida, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but the refugee camp in Bethlehem. And we looked at the wall there. And we then also, because there was another initiative I was involved in, which was to help build a cinema in Jenin, right at the northern end of the occupied territories of the West Bank. So we drove all through the West Bank, went to Jenin and met with people there. And I was absolutely horrified by it. Not just by the wall around Jerusalem and in Bethlehem, and that goes right the way through Jerusalem, but also about the wall being built as it is to annex the occupied territories in Palestine and to make them part of Israel. So I decided not to do the Tel Aviv gig. I didn't go the whole hog. I did do a show in Israel, which I to some extent regret, but to some extent I don't. We cancelled the show in Tel Aviv, and we did it in a place called Neve Shalom in Hebrew, or Wahat Asalom, I think it's called in Arabic, and it's a agricultural community halfway between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, where they grow chickpeas. And the guy who runs it is a wonderful, wonderful man. The premise is that Christians and Muslims and Jews work in the fields alongside one another. Their children go to school together, and so they have at least there a generation of children who are growing up without the inherited hatred from the former generation.
I'm going to show something about that in a minute, but first let's have a look at a clip from the documentary Walled Horizons, where we see you near that